Welcome to Leading the Way, Oakland Schools' leadership interview series highlighting dynamic leaders throughout Oakland County. Today I am joined by Dr. Gabel, who has a very rich leadership experience, and he's here to share some tidbits with our academy for future leaders. Dr. Gabel, thank you so much for joining us today. In preparation for this interview, I did quite a bit of research, and I am extremely impressed with what you've been able to accomplish. I would do it no justice. So would you be able to talk just a little bit about what you've been able to accomplish over your very rich history?
Oh, well, I started out working at what at that time was Detroit Bank and Trust, eventually became Comerica Bank. Grew up in there, became the head of training and development for that organization. I started a subsidiary of that company and ended up buying it from Comerica, spinning that off. And it was a benefits and training company. And actually, as a result, I was the Plant Moran not employer of the year, but entrepreneur of the year for 2001 for service companies in Michigan. Oh, so I was pleased with that accomplishment.
I bet. Yeah.
And then I think from an educational standpoint, I'm certainly excited. I was able to go on and eventually get my doctorate from George Washington University. So those are some of the things that I've done.
And you're an accomplished author as well.
Yes. In fact, my third book is coming out the end of the year.
Okay.
Called The Constitution Kids, about 3 teenagers who discover the Constitution by actually traveling back in time with famous people like Ben Franklin and others.
Oh, well, that would be a wonderful book for us to get our hands on at Oakland Schools. Well, one of the things I learned is that you have led and provided services to over 200 CEOs.
Right.
And so that is no better person to sit here and talk to us about what you need to be a leader and what leadership requires.
Sure.
So what do you think has been the most essential to your success as you've been able to develop such a rich, dynamic history in leadership?
Okay, there are several different things. First of all, being able to have a vision, being able to vision the future and having a vision for the organization and being able to communicate it to the people in the organization so that they get excited about it. Mm-hmm. You can be a good manager, you can be a great manager, but I don't think you can be a leader unless you have a vision. Unless you can communicate to people. If you don't have a vision, you can't really step up to being a leader, I think. Mm-hmm. Second thing that's very important is to invest emotionally in people. And I wasn't always like that. In fact, early in my career, I used people. Mm. I wanted to accomplish as much as possible, have my group, and I drove people. In fact, at one time, early in my HR career, this will sound terrible, but I prided myself on the fact that every person who had worked for me had broken down in tears at some point in time.
It was like a scorecard.
I prided myself on that. Mm-hmm. Well, what happened is around 1980, my wife and I got separated. We were separated. And a friend of mine gave me a book. It was a book written by a fellow by the name of David Grayson in the early 1900s called Adventures in Contentment. And it was about a businessman who became very ill, was near death, and while he was in the hospital, he said, if I ever survive this, I don't want to go back to the rat race. I want to move on to a farm. And in fact, he does survive. He moves on to a farm with his sister, and the book is a number of stories about the people he meets while on his farm. His neighbor Horace, the town doctor, a traveling salesman who's selling great books. And when I'd read these, I'd see the richness of the people he was meeting. He would bring out all of their nature and their humanity. And I remember at one point just breaking down. I'm in my apartment and breaking down and saying, why don't I meet people like this? And then it dawned on me, I meet people like this every day. Mm-hmm. I just blow them off because they're not doing something for me. Totally changed my life. Wow. From that point on, I began looking and really focusing on people and what they're all about, listening to them. And certainly as I continued growing as a leader and having bigger organizations, I really focused on how do I get them actively involved. So that's a second thing that's very important. Also, understanding that we create our own reality. Okay. your reality is different from mine. Now, we have the same reality. There's an objective reality in that we both probably agree that you're sitting on a chair and I'm sitting on a chair.
Sure.
Where we differ is when we look at people and we look at ideas. So the mindsets you have about the world create your reality. You create your own reality. So if you think that the world is made up of people who are going to try to take advantage of you, you're going to approach people cautiously. You're going to be a cynic. On the other hand, if you think people are basically good, they want what's best, you're going to be far more open in dealing with other people. You're going to welcome new friendships, have people come into your sphere. A predisposition to action is very important also. I've seen a lot of managers over the years who have difficulty making a decision. They want all of the facts. They want to have everything tied down before they make a decision. And the world doesn't work that way. You've got to be able to and willing to make decisions and take actions, not having 100% of the information.
That's scary for some people.
It's very scary, especially for people in human resources, because a lot of times we've been drummed into us all of the laws that surround us, all of the things we can't do. And I'll get to that later on, talking about that, because that affects us and not in a positive way.
It does.
Not in a positive way. So those are basically things. One final thing. If you surround yourself with people who are complements to you, it makes a much better organization. So for instance, when I had Great Lakes Strategies, my chief financial officer was far stronger in finance than I was. My head of sales, far better salesperson than I was.
Sure.
That creates much more of a synergy in the organization. So those are things that I think were important.
It's very helpful to have smarter people in the room than you, because you can't do it all.
Right.
You cannot do it all. You'll drive yourself pretty much, ragged if you try to do all the things.
That's right.
So I don't know at what point you got this book and were able to use this book to change the trajectory of your life, but I'm wondering, in terms of your early career, what advice would have been very beneficial to you that you just didn't have, and this is something that we can communicate out now?
Well, the first one would be focus not only just on production or results, but focus on people. And I don't mean just making people happy. Now, if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you're starting out with security. You want to make sure the people, you pay people reasonably well and you provide benefits. You want to make sure you do that. But when I say concern for people, I really mean getting them actively involved so they feel that they're a part of the organization, that they feel that they're doing meaningful work, so that they can be excited about when the organization accomplishes things, as opposed to what I'd said about how I used people earlier. Very different focus. So I had learned that very early on in my career. It would have gotten me around some humps that I had to jump over and some problems that I had to work through early on. So that's certainly one of them. Secondly, understanding that, I mentioned mindset before, the mindsets you hold have gotten you where you are today. The mindsets that dominate your mind got you where, they've also kept you where you are. If you view the world a certain way, if I have certain mindsets, they've gotten me where I am, but they could keep me back also. For instance, if I view that I'm terrible with people, that I don't like dealing with people, well, that's going to keep me from being involved in any role. It's
a self-fulfilling prophecy at some point.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So those are a couple of things that I think are very important.
So when we think about leadership, and we have a lot of these different, I say buzzwords now, so it's emotional intelligence, all the things that everyone is talking about. What is maybe a thing that people aren't talking about enough, but is really important to being a good leader?
One is that a great leader is willing to do just about whatever is necessary to go after the right thing or to do the right thing, all the way up to risking your job, in fact. I'll give you a quick story on that. When I was at Comerica, head of HR, I reported to him. I remember we had a problem in our information technology area, and it was a serious problem, and the head of IT, who was fairly new, was going to fire this employee, a middle-level manager in the organization. And my boss, the head of HR, got it through the grapevine that this person was going to be a scapegoat. He was late 50s, early 60s, had been with the bank for years, and my boss said, you know what, Gary, I need to do some fact finding here. I need to see what's going on. He did that and found out that the guy was going to be a scapegoat. So he said, I'm going to go to the head of IT and his boss, who was the head of operations, and see if I can't convince them to not fire this guy. He went to them, they shut him down immediately. They said, no, we're firing him. He came back and he said, well, Gary, you know what I've got to do? I've got to go to the chairman and the president above their heads. And I said, his name was Larry. I said, Larry, I said, are you nuts? I said, these two, both of them were very new, the head of operations and the head of IT. They're very new employees. They're in their honeymoon period with the organization. The chairman and president are going to want to support them. Larry, you are not in your honeymoon period. I said, you could lose your job. He said, I've got to do what's right. I've got to do the right thing. He ended up going to the chairman, president. He did save the fellow's job. They were not happy with him, but they didn't fire him. But I'm going to tell you, the next day, looking in the mirror, I just looked in the mirror and saw what kind of person I was, and I was not proud. I was not proud of what I was. I said, I've really learned a lesson in leadership here. A second thing that's not talked about is power. There are two types of power. There's position power. You hold position power because of your role in human resources. But there's also moral power. Just because you have position power does not mean you have moral power. Does not mean people would look up to you, believe in you. The moral power comes because you are really trying to do the right thing. That you are seeking the what's right instead of the who's right. You aren't just agreeing with somebody because of the position they have, but you're really trying to find the best solutions for the organization. A third thing is, it's based on a word I coined. I coined a word a long time ago when I created a program called LeaderWorks. The term is called negathoughts, negathought. A negathought is a thought that totally disempowers you. For instance, you could say, I'm terrible at math. Or like I said a minute ago, I'm not good with people. When you say those things, if you say I'm terrible at math, do you think you're ever going to be good at math?
No.
Because you're never going to do anything that tries to be better at math. If you say you're terrible at people, you're likely to avoid situations with people in that. So helping not only yourself understand your negathoughts as a leader, but helping the people who work in the organization understand their negathoughts and help them rephrase them. So it could be, instead of I'm terrible at math, math is a challenge for me. It requires me to do more work to get through it. Things like just rephrasing negathoughts to give you some power. And in that, one of the words that comes into my mind is choice. Choice is a very, very powerful word. You're where you are today because of the choices you made, because of the choices of friends you made, choices of what college you went to, what you majored in college, how you spend your free time. All of these choices determine where we are in our lives. So choice is very important. And then finally, understanding that we have a stronger organization if we delegate decision-making to the lowest level possible. My wife worked at one of the automotive companies. I won't say which one, but I used to joke with her because I said, boy, they delegate decision-making to the highest level possible. Only the VPs in that organization would make decisions. None of the people who are have MBA, none of them were allowed to make any important decisions at all. That doesn't make for a strong organization.
Which I also would imagine you didn't have a lot of buy-in either because the decisions didn't get made with their input.
That's exactly right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, people tend to support what they help build. We know that going forward. So looking ahead, what do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities for leaders in our community?
There are several different ones. The first of all, as you know, we have a big gap between people today in our country, largely around political, partisan, but it's kind of getting into all aspects of our lives where people just don't seem to like one another and find ways to just be very argumentative with one another. That's a big issue, finding ways to bring people together, because that's got to be a big factor we're running into in our schools. That you see that in school board meetings. A second thing is, when we talk about school systems, we have limited financial resources. That's the reality of school systems. Finding creative ways to deal with them is very important. If you can find creative ways to deal with the limited financial resources, you help the system out enormously. A third thing is we've got to find a way to bridge the gap between wealthy school districts like Bloomfield Hills. When I went to their new high school, my God, those students have everything you can imagine. Compare that to a less wealthy district like Pontiac. We need to find ways to give those students in Pontiac the same kinds of opportunities that the students in Bloomfield Hills have, because they're being dealt a poor hand of cards, and we need to change that. I think attracting and retaining quality people is a huge issue. You mentioned it when we were talking earlier, that attracting people to human resources, quality people, very, very much of a challenge. And then finally, dealing with the advances in technology and artificial intelligence, how they're going to be affecting our jobs are critical. Catholic Central is putting in a $61 million new STEM facility that is going to have all kinds of new robotics and everything. In fact, they're even going to do pilot training. And they say eventually we'll be able to train our students all the way up to become actually commercial pilots for major airlines. And the interesting thing they said, I'm going to take this right back to what I said about Bloomfield Hills versus Pontiac. They said, we're going to make our STEM center available to other schools. I thought, wow, you've got a great competitive advantage, but you're opening it up. Now, I don't know how far they're willing to go, but wouldn't it be great if students from Pontiac, Detroit were able to go into Catholic Central and use and send a team of kids who are working on robotics things in there to work on their projects. It'd be great.
And that collective community is really important, because we all have the same goal in mind, right? We want to educate high quality students throughout our state so that we can have, and be the best state for that. So I get that. What would you give as emerging leaders in our Human Resource Academy? What advice would you give them?
Okay, there are some things here. First of all, try to view the world through the eyes of the leader of your organization or the CEO. In here, it's often the superintendent. In my experience, I've been on both sides of human resources. Human resource departments are often blockers more than they are enablers. And again, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times because of all the laws we deal with, but they tend to work to preserve the status quo instead of looking at what's possible. What can we possibly do? So I'd say, understanding that, look at options, look at possibilities rather than limitations when you're pursuing your job. Instead of looking at what can't be done, try to figure out ways in which we can make things happen for the organization while still being legal and all of that. If you understand that you can never make everyone happy, then you can make decisions and take actions based on what's right for you to do, understanding that there's always going to be someone there to criticize you.
True.
Always. Even if you try to make everyone happy, someone will criticize you for that.
Yep.
So if you understand that, I remember one of the employees in our organization, really good employee, hard worker. Every time she'd do something, there would be somebody who would complain about whatever she had done, whatever project she was working on. She would let that affect her all the time. And I'd have to sit down with her and say, don't let that bother you. That's one person who's not happy with it, but you've got a number of people over here who are working quite well with what you've done here. But she would let that person, she would let it gnaw at her and make her very, very unhappy and really affect her enthusiasm for the job.
Sure.
So those are some of the things I would recommend.
Well, I could stay here for hours with you. I'm sure that we only got the tip of the iceberg in terms of your leadership. And many of those things I was able to see in my own leadership journey. And they're really good nuggets. And I'm really happy to be able to share this information with our Leadership Academy, and really grateful you were able to join us.
Glad to do it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining this session of Leading the Way. See you next time.